Connor had always been a man of routine, especially when it came to his work. Every month, like clockwork, he would pack his bags, kiss his wife, Ariana, goodbye and leave for his business trip. The separation never lasted long, but it was long enough to make him miss her deeply. He always counted the days until he could return home, where they would share their quiet evenings together, catching up on life and enjoying the little things that made their relationship special. This month was no different. Connor had left early on a Monday morning, his suitcase packed with everything he would need for the week ahead. Ariana, ever supportive, kissed him goodbye with a smile and promised to be waiting for him when he returned. But Connor's life, like everyone else's, had a way of being unpredictable. His company had encountered a series of unexpected technical issues, forcing him to cut his trip short. What was supposed to be a full week of work was now reduced to just a few days. With extra time on his hands, Connor saw the perfect opportunity to surprise Ariana. He decided to return home early and treat her to a special evening. He knew exactly what would make her smile: her favorite bottle of red wine and a homemade dinner. The journey back was long, but Connor's excitement to see Ariana kept his mind busy. He stopped at a small vineyard on the way home, picking up the wine he knew she adored. He also made a stop at the local butcher's shop for some fresh steak, a meal that he knew would be perfect for the night. The sun was setting by the time he finally drove through the familiar streets of his neighborhood. Connor's heart raced with anticipation as he approached their house. As he walked up to the front door, his mind raced with thoughts of how Ariana would react. Would she be surprised? Would she be thrilled? He imagined the two of them sitting down at the dinner table, laughing and talking about their week. He could already picture the warmth in her eyes when she saw him. But when he opened the door, something felt off. The house was eerily quiet, and there was no sign of Ariana. The light in the living room was dim, casting shadows across the furniture. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. Connor paused for a moment, setting down the wine and the bag of groceries. Ariana had told him she would be resting, yet she wasn't on the couch where she usually liked to relax. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Connor called out her name softly, but there was no answer. He walked through the house, checking every room, but Ariana was nowhere to be found. The bed was neatly made, and her phone sat charging on the nightstand, an unusual sign, given that she usually left it with her. A growing sense of unease crept over him, though he tried to shake it off. Perhaps she was in the backyard or out for a walk. She had mentioned wanting some fresh air earlier that morning, right before he left. But as Connor stood in the kitchen, the sound of his phone vibrating on the counter broke his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen. It was a notification, an alert from his tracking app. The message read, "Ariana's car parked in front of David's house." David, his cousin. Connor's mind raced, wondering what Ariana could be doing there. David had always been a quiet, somewhat aloof figure in their family. The two men shared a distant bond, one built on polite greetings during family gatherings but little else. Yet, despite this distance, Connor had always trusted him. That trust, however, was now in question. Connor grabbed his jacket and left the house, his mind whirling with questions. Why would Ariana's car be parked at David's? What was going on? He drove quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. The street leading to David's house seemed to stretch on forever as his thoughts raced. Could it be a coincidence? Perhaps Ariana had stopped by for something trivial, something that wasn't worth mentioning. Or maybe something else was going on. As he neared David's house, Connor parked a block away and decided to walk the rest of the way. He didn't want to alert either of them by drawing attention with his car. With every step he took, his breath quickened. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. What if Ariana was hiding something? What if David was involved in something that would shatter everything Connor had believed about their lives together? When he arrived at the corner of the street, Connor ducked behind a large oak tree and peered down the road. There, in front of the house, was Ariana's car, parked just as the notification had said. His heart sank. She was here. But why? And what was she doing here? The front door to David's house opened and Connor's pulse quickened. Ariana stepped out, her face bright with a smile. She was laughing with David. A wave of nausea hit him. His legs went weak and he gripped the tree for support. He watched in disbelief as Ariana walked down the porch steps, her head tilted back in laughter as David, his arms casually draped around her shoulders, said something to her that made her smile even wider. The sight was unbearable. Connor felt the ground beneath him shift, as though the very foundation of his world was crumbling. Ariana and David said their goodbyes with a brief embrace. She climbed into her car and drove off without looking back. Connor stayed hidden, watching her leave, his heart filled with a mixture of confusion, betrayal, and an overwhelming desire to understand what had just unfolded. Everything he had believed about his marriage, about Ariana, was now uncertain. The woman he had trusted, the woman he loved, was standing on the porch, laughing with his cousin. And Connor had no idea why. But he knew one thing for certain: he needed answers. Connor stood there, hidden behind the tree, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The laughter, the embrace, everything felt like a sick joke. His heart was pounding in his chest, his throat dry as he tried to make sense of what he had just witnessed. Ariana had been the love of his life, his partner, his confidant. To see her with David, to see them so comfortable, so carefree, it felt like a cruel betrayal. As the last remnants of the evening light faded, Connor made his way back to his car, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. The drive home felt like an eternity. His thoughts were a jumble of unanswered questions. Why had Ariana been at David's house? What was their relationship? Was it just a friendly visit, or was there something more? Connor pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of his home now seeming foreign. He sat in his car for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He could feel the tension building inside him, a mixture of hurt, anger, and confusion. He couldn't just let this slide. He had to confront her. He had to know the truth. With a deep breath, Connor walked into the house. The silence that greeted him was suffocating, just like before. The wine, still unopened, sat on the kitchen counter where he had left it earlier. It was supposed to be a romantic evening, a surprise, a gesture of love. Now it felt like a cruel reminder of how little he truly knew about his wife. He called out for Ariana, his voice sharp with a mix of frustration and disbelief. There was no answer. He checked the living room, the kitchen, the backyard. Nothing. The house felt emptier than ever. She wasn't home. She had to be at David's house still, but Connor was done waiting. He was done with the questions swirling in his head. Without a second thought, he grabbed his phone and sent her a message. Asterisk, I know where you were tonight. I saw you with David. We need to talk. Asterisk. The words felt cold as they left his fingers, but they were the only words that made sense in that moment. He didn't care about niceties. He needed answers. He needed to understand. Minutes later the phone buzzed. Ariana had replied. Asterisk, Connor, please let's not do this. I'm so sorry. I'll explain everything when I get home. Asterisk. Her message was filled with what seemed like genuine remorse, but to Connor, it felt like an excuse. He couldn't trust the words anymore, not after what he had seen. He stared at the screen, his anger building. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't wait any longer. Ariana arrived home about an hour later, her face flushed with the effort of hurrying. Connor was standing in the living room, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her as she walked through the door. Her expression softened when she saw him, but it didn't reach her eyes. She knew what was coming. Connor, she said softly, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. Please just let me explain. No, Connor interrupted, his voice sharp, cutting through the air. There's no explanation for what I saw. I saw you with him, Ariana. Laughing, hugging like nothing was wrong. Like you didn't just break my heart. His voice cracked on the last word, the pain in his chest more overwhelming than any anger. Ariana's eyes filled with tears as she took a step closer to him. It's not what you think. Please just listen to me. No, Connor repeated, stepping back, putting distance between them. I don't need to hear your excuses. I don't need to know why you did it. You were with David, Ariana. I saw it. What's worse, I was the one you promised to love, to be faithful to. Ariana collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking as she covered her face. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered through her sobs. It just happened. Connor clenched his fists at his sides, fighting the urge to lash out. How long, Ariana? How long has this been going on? I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It's been happening for a while now. It started when you were traveling. I don't know why, but I found comfort in him. He was there when I felt lonely. I never meant for it to go this far. Connor felt as though the floor had fallen out from beneath him. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with everything, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. And all for what? A moment of comfort? A fleeting feeling of connection? You don't get it, do you? Connor said, his voice low, cold. You've destroyed everything we had. And for what? A few stolen moments with David? Ariana reached for him, but Connor stepped away. Please don't touch me, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I can't look at you right now. Ariana's tears were silent, her shoulders trembling with the weight of the moment. I'm sorry, Connor. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I'll do anything. Please don't leave me. Connor stood there for a long time, silent, his heart torn between the woman he had loved and the woman who had shattered everything with her betrayal. His mind raced, his emotions a blur of anger, hurt, and disbelief. But there was something else there too, something deeper, something that Connor couldn't ignore. He had to let go. With a deep sigh, Connor finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't do this anymore, Ariana. I need to walk away. The silence in the room was deafening. Ariana's sobs filled the space between them, but Connor stood motionless as if he had already made up his mind. His chest tightened with every breath, the weight of the decision he had just made sinking deeper into his soul. The house, once a home filled with love and laughter, now felt cold and hollow. It was a place he could no longer bear to stay in, a place where every memory had been tainted by the betrayal he had just uncovered. I never wanted this, Ariana's voice broke through the silence. Her words were desperate, but they no longer held the weight they once did. Connor had heard her apologies too many times, and now they just felt like empty words. You should have thought about that before you let it happen, Connor replied, his voice quiet but firm. The anger that had boiled inside him was now being replaced by something heavier, sadness, regret, and a sense of finality. Ariana reached out again, her hand trembling. Please don't leave. I'll make it right. I promise I'll change. I'll do whatever it takes. Connor took a step back, looking at her for the last time with a mixture of sorrow and determination. You don't get it, Ariana? This isn't about promises anymore. It's about trust. And you've broken that trust. I can't stay here, pretending everything is fine when it's not. Ariana's tears fell freely now, her face a picture of desperation. I'm sorry. I was stupid. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never meant to hurt you. Connor turned away, the pain in his chest growing with each word she spoke. I know you didn't mean to, but you did. And now I can't fix this. I can't fix us. His feet felt heavy as he walked toward the door. The weight of the decision, the weight of walking away from everything he had built with Ariana, felt unbearable. He hesitated for a moment at the doorway, looking back at her one last time. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with his whole heart, was now just a stranger. I'll pack my things, Connor said, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but. I'm leaving tonight. Ariana stood there, frozen as Connor stepped out into the night, the door clicking shut behind him. Her world seemed to collapse around her as she heard the faint sound of his footsteps fade into the distance. She sank to the floor, her sobs echoing through the empty house. Connor drove aimlessly through the city streets, not knowing where he was going. His mind was a blur of thoughts and emotions. He had just left everything behind. The home, the memories, the woman he had promised to spend his life with. It felt like a dream, a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. He found himself at a park near the outskirts of town. The moonlight cast long shadows across the empty benches, and the stillness of the night offered him a strange kind of comfort. Connor pulled over and sat in the car for a long while, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His phone buzzed with notifications, but he ignored them all. He couldn't deal with anything right now, not Ariana, not David, not even himself. After a while, Connor stepped out of the car and walked to a bench overlooking the empty field. He needed some time alone to think, to clear his mind. He couldn't keep running on emotions. He needed clarity. As he sat there, staring up at the stars, the reality of the situation began to sink in. He had walked away from his marriage, from the woman he thought he would grow old with. But somewhere deep inside he knew it was the right choice. He couldn't stay in a relationship built on lies, on betrayal. He couldn't let himself be trapped in a cycle of false hope. The stillness of the night offered no answers, but it gave him a sense of peace, a temporary escape from the chaos swirling in his mind. He knew the days ahead would be difficult. He would have to navigate the aftermath of his decision, dealing with Ariana's hurt, his own pain, and the consequences of his choice. But for the first time in what felt like years, Connor felt like he was in control of his life again. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would rebuild. He would find a way to move forward, to heal, and to find peace in his own life. The next morning, Connor gathered his things, quietly packing up his belongings while Ariana was still asleep. He couldn't bear to look at her, couldn't bear the idea of seeing her face while the last remnants of their life together were stripped away. It was all too much to process. Before he left, Connor took one last look at the house they had shared. The walls that had once echoed with laughter now felt like a tomb. He thought about the good times, the vacations, the quiet evenings, the plans they had made. But those memories felt distant now, like a lifetime ago. The love he had felt for Ariana was still there, but it was tainted, distorted by her betrayal. He grabbed his bags and left the house without a word, stepping out into a world that felt uncertain and foreign. There was no going back now. As he drove away, Connor felt a pang in his chest, but he also felt something else. A sense of freedom. It was small, but it was there. The future was unknown, but for the first time in a long time he wasn't afraid. The days after Connor left Ariana were a blur. He had found temporary shelter at a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, a place that felt distant from everything he had known. The apartment was bare, with only the basics, furniture that felt more like necessities than comforts, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and the echo of his own thoughts that seemed to bounce off the walls. Connor spent his time pacing, thinking, and processing what had happened. He had always believed that love could endure, that trust could be rebuilt. But now, everything he had once believed in felt like an illusion. Ariana's betrayal had shattered something inside him, and though he was no longer weighed down by the suffocating tension of his former life, the pain of loss still gnawed at him. Despite the physical distance, Connor couldn't escape the constant reminders of his past life. His phone, once filled with messages from Ariana, now remained silent. The silence was deafening. The world outside felt unchanged, but his world had been turned upside down. His mind wandered to Ariana often, to what she must be feeling. Was she regretting her actions? Was she truly sorry? The questions never stopped. He kept his distance, never responding to her texts, her calls, or her emails. Connor didn't know if he was punishing her, or if he was simply trying to heal. It didn't matter. The emotional wound was too deep to reopen, not yet. Meanwhile, Ariana's life had spiraled in a direction she never anticipated. The loss of Connor, the man she had once promised to cherish, had left her devastated. The guilt she felt was unbearable, and it seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Her attempts to reach out to Connor were met with silence. She had hoped that somehow, if she apologized enough, if she explained herself enough, he might come back. But she knew deep down that the damage had been done. Ariana's family had disapproved of her actions, but their disappointment was nothing compared to Connor's absence. Her friends, too, had pulled away, unsure of how to respond to the revelation of her betrayal. She found herself more isolated than ever before, and the life she had once known, filled with laughter, love, and companionship, now felt like a distant memory. She spent her days in a haze, going through the motions of work and social obligations, but it all felt hollow. She was no longer the woman Connor had once loved. The woman she saw in the mirror was a stranger, someone who had destroyed her life with one careless decision. David, too, had his own share of consequences. Their brief affair had left him in a precarious position. Connor's family was furious with him, and the relationship he once had with his cousin, however distant, had been severed. The scandal left him a pariah among his relatives. David had never imagined that his actions would cost him so much, but now he was alone, having lost the trust of the people closest to him. The weight of their betrayal hung heavy over both Ariana and David. They had torn apart something that could never be repaired. And as time went on, they began to realize the extent of the consequences of their actions. Connor had walked away and they had lost him forever. Connor, for his part, began to find a new rhythm in his life. He returned to work, threw himself into projects that he had once neglected, and started to rebuild himself. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the grief crept in, when the memories of Ariana, of their life together, would overwhelm him. But the pain was becoming more manageable, and with each passing day he felt a little stronger. He joined a local gym, started running, and even began to pick up old hobbies he had long abandoned: reading, writing, and painting. They were small steps, but they were forward steps. It was a way for him to reclaim a part of himself that had been lost in the aftermath of his marriage. Yet even as he worked toward healing, Connor knew there were still scars he had to address. He had to let go of the anger, the resentment, and the feeling of betrayal that had consumed him. It wasn't easy, and some days were harder than others. But he was determined to move on, to find peace, and to learn from the experience rather than be defined by it. As he spent more time reflecting, Connor realized that while he had lost something precious, he had also gained something valuable. He had learned that his happiness, his peace, could not be tied to anyone else. He was not defined by his marriage to Ariana, or by the betrayal that had shattered it. He was his own person, and he had the power to shape his future. One evening, while sitting at his kitchen table, Connor picked up his phone. He stared at it for a long moment before deciding to check his messages. There were still texts from Ariana, unread and unanswered. He hesitated before scrolling through the messages. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I'll try. Please let me know if we can talk. Connor, I miss you. I miss us. Can we please talk? I'll do anything to make it right. Connor felt a pang in his chest. He had read those messages countless times in the past week, each time trying to decide what to do. He didn't want to hurt her more, but he also knew that any contact would only make it harder for both of them. For a long time he had resisted responding. But now, as he stared at her words, he realized something. He had been holding on to the past, holding on to his anger and hurt. Maybe it was time to let go. Not for Ariana, but for himself. He typed out a brief reply. I think it's best we don't talk anymore, Ariana. We've both moved on in different ways and I need to keep moving forward. I wish you well, but it's time for both of us to heal. With that, Connor pressed send. It was final, but it was also freeing. He didn't need her to heal. He didn't need her approval. All he needed was to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And with that, he closed his phone, stood up, and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that flickered like stars in the distance. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. The days after Connor sent his final message to Ariana were quiet. He kept himself busy, focusing on his work, his health, and trying to keep his mind from wandering back to the life he had left behind. The nights, however, were a different story. They were long and often filled with restless thoughts, memories of the past, the sound of Ariana's laughter, the warmth of her touch. It all felt like a distant dream, something he could barely reach anymore. He had chosen to let go, to move forward, but there were still moments when the weight of his loss pressed down on him. Yet each day that passed, Connor felt a little less burdened. He had begun to find solace in the simple things: the rhythm of his morning runs, the peaceful quiet of his apartment, the satisfaction of a day well spent at work. The healing process was slow, but it was happening. One Saturday afternoon, after finishing a workout at the gym, Connor decided to visit the park. He had been avoiding it for months. It had been a place where he and Ariana used to spend lazy weekends sitting on a bench talking about their dreams. But now it was different. It felt like a space where his past was always lurking, waiting to remind him of what had been lost. But today something was different. He felt ready to face it. Ready to walk through those memories without allowing them to consume him. He arrived at the park just as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the sky. The air was crisp and there were a few people jogging along the paths or walking their dogs. Connor found a bench, one of the same ones he and Ariana used to sit on, and sat down. The familiar sights, the smell of the grass, and the soft hum of the park made him feel oddly at peace. As he sat there, reflecting on how far he had come, he noticed a woman jogging along the path. She was wearing a bright red hoodie, her hair tied back in a ponytail. Connor's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he quickly looked away, not wanting to appear intrusive. But then as she approached, she stopped. "Connor?" she asked, her voice laced with surprise. Connor looked up, a little taken aback. The woman standing in front of him was familiar, though it took him a moment to place her. "Sophia?" he asked, finally recognizing her. Sophia was a friend of his from college, someone he hadn't seen in years. They had been close back then, studying together, sharing the ups and downs of university life. After graduation, their paths had diverged and they lost touch. Seeing her now, unexpectedly, brought a strange sense of nostalgia. "Wow, I can't believe it's you." Sophia smiled, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "How long has it been?" "A few years, I guess," Connor replied, standing up to greet her. "How have you been?" "I've been good. Actually, I just moved back to town recently. I've been getting back into my old jogging routine," she said, gesturing to the path she had just run. "And you? What's been going on with you?" Connor paused for a moment, considering how much to say. His life had changed so much recently, and he didn't want to get into the details of his personal struggles. But there was something about seeing Sophia again that made him feel comfortable. "A lot, actually. Life's been a bit complicated. But I'm getting through it." Sophia nodded understandingly. "I get that. We all go through things that knock us down. But it's good to see you here, looking good, getting back on your feet." They stood there for a while, chatting casually about life, work, and everything in between. Connor found himself laughing, something he hadn't done much in the past few months. It felt nice to be around someone who wasn't tied to his past, someone who didn't know the painful details of his recent life. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Sophia smiled at him. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, there's a new cafe downtown and I was planning to check it out tomorrow. Would you want to join me? Just for old time's sake?" Connor hesitated for a moment. It had been so long since he had felt open to new experiences, especially with someone new. But something about Sophia's presence, her easygoing nature, made him feel at ease. He smiled, a genuine, unforced smile, and nodded. "I'd like that," he said. The next day they met at the cafe. The conversation flowed easily between them as if no time had passed at all. Connor found himself talking about things he hadn't realized he wanted to share: the pain of his past, the process of moving on, and his journey of healing. Sophia listened attentively, never interrupting, offering kind words of encouragement when needed. By the time they finished their coffee, Connor realized something. He was no longer running from the past. He was accepting it, learning from it, and using it to grow. Sophia had reminded him of who he was before everything fell apart. She had reminded him of the joy that came from genuine connections with others. As they walked out of the cafe, Sophia turned to him and said, "I'm glad we reconnected, Connor. I can see that you're in a better place now. And you deserve that." Connor felt a warmth spread through him. It wasn't the same warmth he had once felt for Ariana, but it was something different. It was the warmth of new beginnings. "Thanks, Sophia. I think I'm starting to understand that," he replied. That evening, as Connor sat in his apartment reflecting on the day, he realized that he had crossed an important threshold. He was no longer tethered to the past, to the pain, to the life he had once known. He had learned to forgive not just Ariana but himself as well. He had allowed himself to let go of the anger and regret that had consumed him for so long. And now, with the prospect of new friendships, new experiences, and the endless possibilities of the future, Connor felt more alive than ever. He wasn't sure where life would take him next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready for whatever came his way. As the weeks passed, Connor found himself in a steady rhythm. The initial chaos and pain of his separation from Ariana had subsided, leaving space for healing and growth. His days were filled with work, new experiences, and, most importantly, a growing sense of self. Connor realized that while the past would always be a part of him, it no longer had control over his future. The future, as he had discovered, was his to shape. Sophia and Connor's friendship blossomed. They began meeting more often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks in the park, and even weekend hikes. She had an easy way of making him feel comfortable, and in her company Connor found himself laughing more, reconnecting with the light-hearted side of himself that had been buried beneath layers of grief. She was a reminder that life could still be enjoyable, that there was still room for joy, even after heartbreak. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, Connor felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. The tension in his shoulders had eased, and the constant ache in his chest had lessened. "I think I'm starting to get it," he said to Sophia, who sat beside him, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. "I spent so much time holding on to the past, angry and hurt, thinking that I could never move on. But now, I think I'm finally starting to forgive myself." Sophia smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the setting sun. "Forgiving yourself is the hardest part, Connor. We're often our harshest critics. But you've come a long way. You're not the same person you were a few months ago. You've grown." Connor took a deep breath, absorbing her words. "I'm trying. I'm learning to let go of the anger and the resentment. It's been hard, but I feel like I'm finally starting to find some peace. Maybe that's what I needed all along." Sophia nodded in understanding. "Peace is hard to find when we're clinging to something that's already gone. But you're getting there." Connor gazed out at the city lights, feeling a strange sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken. It wasn't the path he had imagined, and it hadn't been easy, but it was his journey, and he was learning to walk it with strength. A few weeks later, Connor received a message from Ariana. It was brief, simple, and direct. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I just wanted to thank you for the time we shared. I'll always remember the good moments. I hope you find happiness, Connor." Connor stared at the message for a long time. A part of him had always wondered if she would ever reach out, if she would ever truly acknowledge the pain she had caused. But there it was, a message of closure, a quiet acknowledgement of the past. He knew that nothing would bring back what they had, and that was okay. He had already moved on, and this message, while bittersweet, didn't have the power to bring him back to a place of anger or regret. Connor sat down at his desk, took a deep breath, and typed a response. "Thank you, Ariana. I wish you the best. Take care." As soon as he pressed send, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had said everything he needed to say, and it felt like the last piece of the puzzle was finally in place. He wasn't holding on to the past anymore. He was free to move forward. The months that followed were filled with small victories. Connor began to travel more, something he had always wanted to do but had never found the time for. He visited new cities, explored different cultures, and pushed himself to step outside his comfort zone. Each trip was an opportunity to rediscover the world, and himself. He took on new projects at work, projects that excited him, challenged him, and allowed him to tap into his full potential. For the first time in a long while, Connor felt like he was truly living, not just surviving. Sophia remained a constant in his life. They continued to spend time together, but their bond had evolved into something deeper. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but it was a friendship that Connor cherished. She had been there when he needed someone, and her unwavering support had played a significant role in his healing process. And then, one evening as they sat together at a cafe, Connor found himself looking at her in a way he hadn't before. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but rather a quiet realization that, over time, his feelings for her had grown into something more. The connection they shared was different from what he had experienced with Ariana, but it was real, genuine, and built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Sophia noticed the change in his demeanor and smiled knowingly. "You're thinking too hard about something," she said with a laugh. "Just go with it. Life's too short to overthink." Connor smiled, a warmth spreading through him. "Maybe you're right." As he walked home that evening, his heart felt light, his mind at ease. He realized that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant accepting it, learning from it, and using it as a foundation for a better future. He had loved deeply, been hurt profoundly, but he had survived. And now, as he looked ahead, he saw a future filled with endless possibilities. A future where he was no longer defined by his past mistakes or the people who had betrayed him. He was at last free.